Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
They always said family was supposed to be your anchor when the rest of the world got too loud, too bitter, too damn overwhelming to handle alone. But what happens when that anchor turns out to be a chain? A chain you've been dragging behind you for years, smiling like an idiot, thinking it was love when really it was just weight. Heavy weight. That's how I felt the night of my brother's engagement party, standing on the back lawn of my parents' house in Connecticut, pretending to toast to someone else's future while mine was being quietly buried 6 feet under without a headstone. The place was immaculate, long white tents draped in soft string lights, a jazz trio playing Sinatra like it was some kind of cliché fairy tale. Caterers in black vests handed out champagne like we were celebrating a royal wedding, not just the fact that Jake had finally proposed after dating some yoga influencer for 2 years. They'd flown in her family from Seattle, bought out an entire vineyard just for the label, and invited half the goddamn county. Me? I parked across the street because there wasn't even space left in the driveway. I should have known something was off when Mom hugged me like I was an old acquaintance, not her firstborn son. She was smiling, but her eyes were already scanning the crowd, like she was mentally checking names off some invisible guest list. Dad barely looked up from his phone. Jake was glowing. He always had that face that people trusted too easily. Perfect teeth. That tousled hair that somehow looked styled even when he just rolled out of bed. He was wearing a linen suit, holding court with 3 different conversations, nodding like a politician, laughing like a kid who'd never been punched in the gut before. And I stood there, feeling like a damn extra in my own movie. I'd built the business with Dad 15 years ago. Back when we were both broke and stubborn, renting out a busted little garage and telling anyone who would listen that we had a vision. It was me who pitched to our first investors. Me who stayed up learning logistics, who took online courses in coding, who figured out how to run payroll when we hired our first 2 guys. And when Dad had a heart scare in year 5, who the hell do you think kept the lights on? It wasn't Jake. He was in Bali, volunteering at some hostel and posting beach pics on Instagram while I was cleaning up supply chain messes and negotiating contracts with suppliers who didn't even speak English. Jake had the luxury of being the second kid. The golden boy. The world traveler. The one who needed time to figure things out while I was figuring out how to make rent. But I let it go. Year after year, I swallowed it down. Because it was family. Because I believed that loyalty meant something. Because I thought eventually they'd see. When the clinking of the champagne glasses started, I figured it was the usual speech. Some sweet words from Mom. Maybe a cheesy toast from Dad about how lucky Jake was to have found someone so spiritually aligned, whatever the hell that meant. I was standing near the back, sipping something bubbly I couldn't pronounce, when my father cleared his throat and raised his glass. He talked about legacy. About how proud he was of what we'd built. I felt it then, a swell of pride in my chest. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he was going to say my name. That this whole evening wasn't just about Jake. That maybe after everything, he'd acknowledge where it all came from. Then came the sentence. And now, as we look to the future of our family business, it's time to pass the torch. Jake will be stepping into a leadership role moving forward. He'll be taking over the company. People clapped. I didn't hear it at first. My ears rang. My face went cold. I looked at Mom. She was smiling like a damn politician's wife. Jake looked surprised, but not confused. He knew. He'd known. No one said my name. Not once. 15 years, and I was a ghost at my own funeral. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw my glass. I didn't shout or ask questions. I just turned around, walked back past the buffet table, past the valet, across the street, and sat in my car for 5 full minutes with the engine off and my fists clenched so tight I couldn't feel my fingers. They thought that silence was surrender. They didn't know it was the calm before something they'd never forget. Because I didn't just walk out of that party. I walked into something way bigger than they ever saw coming. You ever hear someone say, "It's just business," like those words are supposed to mean anything at all when your life has been poured into something like blood into dry dirt? Because when we started that company, it wasn't just business, it was everything I had. I was 22 years old with student loans I couldn't pay, a beat-up car with a cracked windshield, and a bank account that dipped into the negatives more times than I'd admit to a priest. My dad had just retired from the trades, injured his back pulling engine parts in a freezing garage, and was looking for a second act, something easier on the body, something he could pass down. He came to me with an idea and a handshake. "We build it together, 50-50, he said. "You do the tech, I do the money." I was too young and too hungry to read between the lines. We rented a broken-down, rat-infested unit behind an auto body shop, one of those places where the heat never worked and the roof leaked in 4 different corners. We ran extension cords from the office next door because the power kept shorting out when I plugged in more than one computer at a time. I ate instant ramen for a year and slept on a couch we dragged in from a yard sale. That couch had springs sticking through the cushions, but I still passed out on it night after night with my laptop sliding off my chest and the blue glow of spreadsheets burned into my retinas. I learned everything on the fly: how to write code from YouTube tutorials, how to make invoices in Microsoft Word, how to talk to suppliers who barely spoke English and definitely didn't trust a kid in a hoodie offering them a revolutionary B2B integration. I remember calling a printer in Ohio 12 times in one day because they forgot to include shipping costs and it nearly wiped out our margin. I remember the first time we made a profit over $100 and I bought dollar cheeseburgers to celebrate. That night, my dad said we were on our way. He smiled and patted me on the back like I was a teammate, like I was a partner. Meanwhile, Jake was backpacking through Europe with a trust fund tan and a different girl in every photo. One month he was in Spain volunteering at a surf hostel, which basically meant he got free beer for handing out towels. The next he was in Portugal with some DJ friends, throwing parties on the beach and posting Instagram captions like, "Just living life, man." And every now and then, he'd FaceTime me while I was knee-deep in back-end development or customer complaints. "Dude, you look tired," he'd laugh. "You should take a break." I didn't have time for breaks. I had $200 in the bank and a server that kept crashing because the traffic was finally picking up. I still helped him when he called that night, voice shaky, saying he'd maxed out his card in Amsterdam and needed $5,000 to get home. I wired it to him without even thinking, even though it meant pushing back payroll. He promised to pay me back. He never did. Said he forgot. Said he thought it was a gift. My dad told me to let it go. "He's your brother," he said. "He'll figure things out." Eventually, the company started to look like something real. We hired our first 2 employees, a sales guy and a junior developer, and I stopped sleeping in the office every night. We moved out of the garage into a real space with windows and working plumbing. We bought a coffee machine that wasn't from Goodwill. We got an actual business checking account. Clients started referring other clients, and the numbers on the whiteboard kept growing. I reinvested every damn cent for the first 3 years. No bonuses, no vacations, just growth. By the end of year 7, we were making just under $150 million annually, which meant each of us was pulling around $75 million per quarter. Not bad for a kid who used to steal toilet paper from public restrooms just to save money. Not bad for a company that started with 2 broken chairs and a dream that felt like a joke for the first year. But somewhere along the way, I stopped checking the paperwork. We never had a formal partnership agreement. Dad kept everything under his name, for tax reasons, and I didn't push. He said he'd update it when the time was right. He said I had nothing to worry about. And I believed him, like a good son does, like an idiot does. I figured we were family, and family didn't screw each other over, not like that. Turns out I should have had a lawyer look at it back when we first hit 6 figures. Because when we started growing fast, my dad started pulling back. He showed up less and less. Said he trusted me to run things. Told people I was handling the day-to-day. I thought it meant he respected me. I didn't realize it meant he was setting the stage to hand everything over to someone else. Someone who didn't sweat, didn't struggle, didn't sacrifice a damn thing for what we built. So when they stood up at that engagement party and handed the company to Jake like it was a party favor, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt like a damn idiot for trusting them. When I stepped out of that engagement party, my shoes crunching against gravel while the sound of laughter trailed behind me like an insult whispered under breath, I didn't feel angry the way you might expect. I didn't feel the urge to throw something, didn't want to scream at the top of my lungs or punch a wall like some heartbroken teenager. What I felt instead was colder, deeper, like the quiet weight of realization sinking into your bones when the storm is over and all that's left is the wreckage. It wasn't rage, it was clarity. A kind of sharpened stillness that only comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about what people are really capable of. The sky was dark, but not quite black, the kind of dull navy blue that feels like the in-between space where good things end and bad things haven't fully arrived yet. I unlocked my car without looking back at the house, where they were probably still clinking glasses and pretending everything was fine. And I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes locked on the road like I was navigating through something much more dangerous than a winding Connecticut backroad. When I walked into my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I dropped my keys on the table, pulled my laptop from my bag, and sat down at my desk like it was just another night of work. Except this time, I wasn't building, I was dismantling. Quietly. Efficiently. Without a single ounce of hesitation. The thing about being the one who built everything from scratch is that nobody else ever really knows where the bones are buried. They see the polished surface, the pretty branding, the money flowing in, the clean dashboards and automated systems. But I was the one who wrote the original code for our inventory tracker, the one who created the database schema for our customer management system, the one who set up the cloud servers and registered the SSL certificates and configured the firewalls. My dad liked to tell people I was tech-savvy, like it was some party trick, like I could fix the printer and set up the Wi-Fi. But what I am, is the architect. And when you build something from the ground up, you know exactly where to press when you want the whole thing to freeze. I started with the admin panel, changed the root password, and added two-factor authentication that redirected to a burner email. Then I went into our server dashboard and triggered a maintenance mode protocol, nothing destructive, nothing illegal, just enough to make everything pause until further notice. I logged into the domain registrar and redirected the company's website to a generic under construction page. I reset the banking portal credentials because, yes, I had access there too, thanks to years of being the tech guy who handled wire transfers and reconciled payments when the accounting firm got lazy. Then I wrote up a notification to the bank flagging a request to change the authorized signers, requesting that all such changes be frozen pending legal review. Next, I opened my encrypted notes file, the one I'd kept updated for years, even when I wasn't sure why I was doing it, and started organizing everything. Password logs, server keys, vendor contact sheets, internal communication chains, signed NDAs, contracts with terms that very clearly listed my name as the technical founder. All neat, all dated, all ready to be reviewed by someone who speaks legal fluently. Then I opened my email, drafted a message to my attorney, the attorney I'd met during a failed acquisition pitch 2 years ago who said, "Call me if you ever need leverage." And I did need leverage. Not because I wanted to blow things up, but because leverage meant power and power meant control, and control meant I didn't have to sit in the corner while people who hadn't earned a damn thing passed the crown around like a cigar at a poker game. I scheduled the email to send Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. By the time I shut my laptop, it was well past midnight. The apartment was dead quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the radiator. I sat there for a long while in that dark room, thinking about how many nights I'd spent bent over that same desk, building, fixing, coding, grinding. I thought about every time I said, sure, when my dad asked me to cover something, every time I picked up the slack so Jake could keep finding himself, every time I told myself to be patient because loyalty would be rewarded. But loyalty, I realized, is just a slow kind of poison when it only flows one way. I didn't want to burn the business to the ground. That would have been too easy and, frankly, too small. No, I wanted them to realize what it was like to be shut out of something they assumed would always be theirs. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own ignorance, not out of spite, but out of necessity. If they couldn't see the value in what I built, then they had no business touching it. And if they were going to ignore me while I was in the room, they damn sure remember me when I wasn't. Next morning, they tried to log in. Every password had changed. Every access point locked. When I woke up that next morning, my phone looked like it had suffered some kind of digital seizure. 10 missed calls from my dad, 3 from my mom, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize but had a strong hunch were connected, and a long, passive-aggressive email from Jake sent from a brand new address titled something painfully generic like jakefuturatio@gmail.com. The subject line simply said glitch, as if the problem wasn't a full-scale lockout of the company infrastructure, but just a minor inconvenience he expected me to solve with a smile and a weekend fix. That right there told me everything I needed to know. He still didn't get it. None of them did. They were trying to treat what happened like a malfunction, like a hiccup in the system, like I was just being emotional and would come around once I cooled off. But this wasn't emotion. It was architecture. It was structure. It was control. I let the phone ring all day. I didn't answer the calls, didn't respond to the texts, didn't even read the voicemails. There was nothing they could say that I needed to hear, and besides, I had other things to do. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and went to work. Not for them, not anymore, but for me. I had spent 15 years building that company, and not one single line of code they used was theirs. I was the one who designed the internal CRM, the inventory management tool, the website infrastructure, the payment processor integrations, all the back-end logic, the workflow automations, the vendor API pipelines, hell. I even created the training documents and internal onboarding videos. My dad always thought owning the business meant holding the title on some dusty LLC certificate in a file cabinet, but he never understood that real ownership lives in the infrastructure, and all of that was mine. So I filed paperwork. Clean, quiet, legally airtight paperwork. I formed a new company, same initials, different name, then began pulling in the pieces that had always been under my control, but that I had never claimed because I thought, foolishly, that loyalty would protect me. I re-registered the intellectual property, every line of proprietary code under my own name. I transferred hosting contracts, revoked third-party access tokens, moved the vendor relationships into new contracts that paid out through my new entity. All the tools they depended on to run daily operations, the software licenses, the server credentials, the supplier dashboards, they weren't tied to the business. They were tied to me. And no one had ever bothered to change that because no one thought they had to. They assumed I was just the guy who made things work, not the guy who made things exist. By mid-afternoon, I started getting the emails that sounded less like questions and more like panic disguised as professionalism. Hi, just checking. Are we still on for the dashboard update this week? From our logistics partner. Hey, we're unable to access our service terminal. Should we talk to your team? From our payment processor. One by one, the illusions of stability they took for granted began to crumble, and still, I said nothing. It wasn't until late that evening that my parents finally sent a message I knew was coming. Subject line: family meeting. Just 2 words in the body of the email. Tomorrow. Noon. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just the command. Like they were still in charge. Like this was some minor dispute that could be solved with a little heart-to-heart over coffee and biscotti. I showed up, not for reconciliation, but for confrontation. My dad opened the door looking like he hadn't slept, eyes bloodshot, mouth tight. Mom hovered in the background, arms folded, jaw set in that disappointed way she always used when someone didn't follow her script. Jake sat on the couch, eyes flicking between me and Dad like he didn't know who to align with yet, like he was waiting to see where the wind would blow before picking a side. "We need to talk," my dad started, his voice calm but edged with frustration. "Whatever this is, it's gone too far." "No," I said, stepping into the living room without sitting down. What went too far was handing over my company to someone who can't spell logistics without autocorrect. My mom flinched like I'd slapped her, but my dad kept pushing. "This isn't just about business. This is about family. We built this together. You can't hold the company hostage just because you're hurt." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so goddamn delusional that I couldn't help it. You think this is about hurt feelings? I said, stepping closer. This is about the fact that I built the foundation, and you tried to hand over the keys to someone who doesn't even know where the fuse box is. You kept the ownership in your name, promised me half, then gave it all to him like I was just some employee. Jake finally spoke up, his voice soft but shaky. Look, man, I didn't ask for any of this. Dad and Mom, they said it was the plan. They told me you were too burnt out, that you needed a break. A break? I snapped, turning to him. I don't get breaks, Jake. I get blamed. I get used. I get told to wait my turn. And now I'm telling you all, my turn came the second I stopped asking. They had nothing to say to that. That night, while I was pouring myself a drink back in my apartment, Jake showed up uninvited. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He was scared. And what he told me changed everything. When Jake showed up that night, knocking on my door with the kind of hesitant, nervous energy I'd only ever seen in him after he totaled Mom's car in high school, I wasn't sure what to expect. He had that half smile on his face like he was trying to be casual, but I could see through it instantly. His collar was open, his hair a mess, and there was this weight in his eyes that wasn't usually there, the carefree gloss wiped clean, replaced with something closer to fear than confusion. I didn't say anything right away. I just stepped aside and let him in, and he walked past me slowly like a man walking into a courtroom he didn't want to be in. He didn't sit down. He stood there, hands in his pockets, pacing the edge of my apartment like he couldn't quite figure out how to start a sentence without stepping on a landmine. Eventually, he just blurted it out, like the words had been burning a hole in his throat all day and he couldn't keep them in any longer. Look, man, he said, not looking at me, this whole thing, this takeover, it wasn't even my idea. I didn't respond. I just raised an eyebrow and waited, because I knew there was more. Jake only told the truth when it backed him into a corner. He went on, stumbling a bit as he spoke. Mom and Dad, they pitched it to me months ago. Said they were worried about your burnout, about you being too close to the work. Said you'd thank them later. I didn't even want the company. I was working on a startup idea. Man, crypto tools, NFT stuff. I had no plan to actually run your business. There it was, the heart of it. The betrayal wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment toast at a party. It was a long, simmering plot disguised as concern, baked into soft words and good intentions, wrapped up in the kind of smug manipulation only parents can master after a lifetime of practice. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had written me out like I was the afterthought in my own damn story. Jake finally turned to me, his voice low now, softer than I'd heard in years. I'm not built for this, he said, shrugging like he was embarrassed to admit it. You are. You always were. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up staring at the ceiling, thinking about how things had spun out, how years of work and sacrifice had been reduced to a party announcement and a forced smile. But I also knew I was holding all the cards now. Not emotionally, hell no, that damage was already done, but practically, technically, legally. They had the name on a piece of paper. I had the systems, the code, the infrastructure, the staff's loyalty, the vendor relationships, the client trust. I had the heartbeat. They just had a corpse. So Monday morning, I drafted a contract. 1 page. No fluff. Just the core of it. I would buy the business for a symbolic amount, $1, and in return, all claims to ownership, intellectual property, branding, and corporate structure would be transferred to my new entity, the one I had already set up quietly behind the scenes. It wasn't a favor. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a formality. A final nail. I emailed it to my dad with a subject line that read, "Let's end this clean." He didn't respond that day. Or the next. But on Wednesday morning, I received the signed document in a reply email from his lawyer with the subject line, "Executed agreement." No message. No apology. Not even a damn period. I framed that dollar. By the end of the week, the business cards had changed. The sign on the glass door was new. My name was etched into it in bold black letters, clean and simple. Same office. Same building. Same operation. But now, when people came through the doors, they knew exactly whose company it was. Jake stayed on, not because I owed him anything, but because, strangely enough, he wasn't the villain in the end. I gave him a cushy title, something vague like creative consultant, and told him he could work remotely. He seemed relieved more than anything. No pressure, no power struggles, just space to drift like he always had. He smiled when I handed him the offer letter, said, "This is more than fair," and for once, I think he meant it. As for my parents, they went quiet. No public blow-ups. No legal fights. Just silence. Retirement, I guess. Or maybe shame. Maybe they finally realized that the son they tried to sideline had quietly become the one thing they couldn't replace. I kept the company running, stronger than ever. Streamlined operations. Rebuilt trust with the employees who had heard the rumors. Expanded into new markets. Not out of spite, but because it was mine now, fully, finally, irrevocably mine. I didn't rub it in. I didn't call them to gloat. But I knew they were watching. That was enough. And no, I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I was done waiting for permission to take what I already built. Because there comes a moment when you stop hoping people will do the right thing, and you start making sure they can't do the wrong one again. But sometimes I still wonder on nights when the office is quiet and I'm the last one left, when the fluorescent lights hum just a little too loud. If they hadn't made that toast, would I still be sitting in the shadows? Would I still be the good son, the patient one, the silent partner waiting for recognition that was never coming? I don't know, and maybe I don't want to.